This week, from my trip to Chicago, we remember comics artist Ed Siemienkowicz and find out what's on the minds of comics retailers. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. Recently on Critiquing Comics, Mulele and I have been discussing some articles from a certain comics site suggesting that the direct market is dying and Marvel and DC could be dying off as well. Later in the show, I'll be discussing whether this thinking is accurate with Chicago creator Brian Crowley and with 3 Chicago comic shop managers. But first, Ed Siemienkowicz was a comics creator and all-around artist and Renaissance man who we lost to cancer in 2017 at the age of 43. He was also a magnetic guy who was really enjoyable to be around. You may remember hearing him on this podcast twice. First, way back in 2010, episode 227, when we sat in a Tokyo coffee shop and discussed how an artist can develop a unique style.
I realized that in my own style, I started with an American comics background, loved Marvel and DC and came up with that. Japanese influence, totally took over my life for a long time. So I was tracing, copying, working it into my own style. And then in high school, I got turned on to underground stuff like Dan Clowes. And that blew me out of the water again. So I'm like, I don't have to be this or that. I don't have to be the best manga artist, or I don't have to look like anybody at Marvel, I can find my own style somehow and still just do my own books. And it doesn't have to be genre specific, I just do it on my own terms, and it's possible. Here it is, here's the proof. So that's when I started to back away from manga looking things, but it's hard.
The second time was 4 years later in episode 393, when he helped me get together a group of comics creators for a panel discussion.
Ed, I've known you now for at least a year and a half. I've never heard your name said out loud.
Oh, is that right?
This is the first time.
Yeah, I thought it was
Siemienkowicz.
Siemienkowicz. Yeah. And then people were like, are you related to Bill Stankiewicz?
I said Kevich there. It's not even close. Yours is...
You're right. I forgot.
Yours was not you, everyone else.
I was always pronouncing it Siemienkowicz.
Yeah, it's fun for me because I have a sense of schadenfreude, so I love to hear all the versions.
I would have said Szymanowicz.
And he was also a part of the team that made the Voice of the Republic Star Wars podcast, which we used to run the ad for on this show.
Well, Mike, we're back, and we're not the same old Star Wars complaint show we used to be.
Right.
I was thinking that we need a new theme song, Mm-hmm. I have some ideas.
I'd like to hear them.
We call it Voice of the Republic. Voice of the Republic. People think we're high.
Those 2 Deconstructing Comics episodes were the only 2 times I met Ed. But I still felt like he had an impact on my life, and I've been struggling to accept his death. Before going to Chicago this spring, I was moved to try to get together some of Ed's friends and family during my visit. Maybe I felt like meeting people who knew him would help me work through my feelings. Anyway, if you'll indulge me for the first half of this episode, here are some of the conversations we had at that meetup on April 7th. The first one to show up was Brian Crowley, who was also part of that panel Ed helped me put together in 2014. This is Tim in Chicago, and I'm talking with
Brian Crowley.
Hi, and Brian's been on the show once before.
Yeah.
5 years ago, we were here, I guess, in the same establishment when it had a different name.
When this used to be called Latitude.
Okay, and now it's Gideon Wells.
Now it's called Gideon Wells.
At that time, as listeners might remember, early 2014, we had a comics discussion here with a number of people, including Ed Siemienkowicz, who unfortunately passed away from cancer a few years later in 2017. So we're here back at the same place. We've got some other friends of Ed, as I've been calling them, coming in later, not necessarily comics people. But yeah, so other than you guys who were at that event 2 years ago, I don't really know people who Ed knew, because we kind of got acquainted in different ways. So
it's kind of crazy how, it's kind of crazy how many people Ed knew.
Yeah.
He's
just kind of a magnetic person.
Yeah, he really was. And, through, I would say that the after he passed away, it was fascinating to see how many people all got together to remember him. And we all actually got together at another bar called the Long Room in Chicago. We all had this kind of what the fuck just happened kind of it's the best way I could say, because it was such a shock that it all happened. And shock is a strange word to say considering everything that happened, but it's always shocking when somebody's so young. 43 is super young. So young. I mean, I'm in a couple days I'm turning 40, and I can't imagine. And 43 is just I can't imagine.
Right. Well, I'm 53. I'm
So you're 10 years older than he would have been. Or he was. So it's.
Well, and it was just kind of. I mean, I think he first found that he had cancer not too long after the event that we had here.
Wasn't it
2014, 2015?
So he found out he had cancer on his as he was turning 40, because his book that he wrote is called Fucking 40, and that is all about him having his 40th year being incredibly shitty, and then the cherry on top of everything being shitty was I've got cancer. So
it wasn't just the cancer. I didn't realize. I mean, I knew they had the cancer that year, but there was other stuff too that was bad.
Yeah,
what
he
else?
I guess he had some relationships not work out, and he had some job difficulty. I remember commiserating with him a lot about that, because I was also at the time having a little bit of job difficulty, because it was around the time that this would have been happening, would have been around the time that I was kind of transitioning my career. So, and I remember Ed and I actually showed up to a freelance gig together for Little Debbie, doing the storyboarding thing. And it was so weird. And both of us kind of talked about how weird it was. And at one point, so there was this event, this Little Debbie quote unquote storyboarding event supposed to happen. Little Debbie, like the snack cakes.
The snack cakes.
Snack cakes and
not the wrapper.
It was incredibly bizarre. It was this really bizarre event, and we show up and they go, wait, they delay this thing that we're supposed to start doing by an hour. And what it was essentially a bunch of executives coming out of a room, charging tables to us, and then coming over to our table and being like, this is our idea. And so imagine 10 alpha males surrounding a table in suits, power suits, and men and women in power suits telling you, this is what we want you to draw, and this, and this, and this. It was not great. Wow. But they delayed the thing an hour because they needed to pull up a crane to put a giant foam pencil at the top of the ballroom. And it was just absurd. It was just ridiculous. And I remember Ed was such a sport throughout the whole thing. He just, Ed always was putting on the smile and putting on the charm and just going through it. So it's pretty cool.
And then at one point he thought he'd beaten the cancer, didn't he?
Yeah. It went into remission, and it seemed like. So I remember talking to him at the 4-Star Christmas party about remission, and I remember it's hard. It's always hard when you talk to people when you ask them about how are you doing or how are you feeling, and he seemed. And at the time when I asked him that awkward question, he was like, "Yeah, I'm clear, everything's good," and and then I think out of nowhere, I remember I remember he posted on like Facebook or on YouTube. He posted a thing basically saying that he was dying and that he had come back and it was worse. And man, I just can't even imagine what a fucking nightmare that must have been for him. Because he had gone through. That people had done a big event for him, and man, I was very proud of the community that we have here. Like really, really rallied behind him, and so I believe that the story he was going to do after fucking 40 was going to be how he had the worst year of his life, and then I believe afterwards was one of the best years of his life because
he got a new relationship.
He got a new relationship, and there was like he saw a lot of love from his friends, and he had so many friends and so many people that reached out to him. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I knew that he was sick again, but I think maybe I didn't take it that seriously because I knew he'd beaten it once, or at least seemed to.
Yeah.
And I was going to be coming to Chicago in July 2017, and I was in touch with him on Facebook.
Yeah.
And he said he was in the hospital and he wasn't feeling good, and I wrote him back then, and he never read the message that I sent.
Oh, Jesus.
And I wasn't really sure what to make of that. And I came to Chicago, I didn't hear anything from him. And it wasn't until like a month later that I happened to think I should look at his Facebook page. And I discovered that he passed away on the day that I arrived in Chicago.
Oh, God. Oh, man.
And do you know what time he passed away?
I don't know. I remember going out with friends to go see a movie, and one of our friends, John Lamontia, had been in touch with him, and he got the news that Ed had gone into hospice. So it was like a Sunday, I think, that he had gone into hospice, and then I think shortly after. Ed
it was Sunday. It was a Sunday that I came into Chicago.
Yeah. Tim, it's interesting that you say that because, like, I didn't go visit him in the hospital, and I wish I had. In retrospect, Ed and I I think I would say that we're friends, but we're like closer to the acquaintance line than the friend line, perhaps, because like we both went to the same school, and I saw him at Drink and Draw, and we hung out once or twice by ourselves, but like not a whole lot. But I didn't know. I had no idea until afterwards. I didn't know what he was going throughout the year that he was turning 40 until I read the script for fucking 40. And then that was like mind-blowing to me. Once I read that, I was like, oh my God, I wish I had known all this. Because I think a lot of people, when they read it, they're like, oh my God, I wish I had been here for this guy, or I had been a better support system for this guy. There was a lot that it seems he was holding internally. I remember talking to my wife after reading through it. I remember talking to my wife and being like, oh my God, like just constantly, like reading through it and not knowing how much, I think all artists, all creative people have this thing where we have this person in our brain that's saying, fuck you, you're terrible, right? And fuck you, like, and just all constantly, right? And Ed externalizing that a little bit, he even externalizes that in terms of the character. He makes a character called Other Ed, which is like the successful version of him, who's like slick and who's always like telling him like, you're not good enough, which is fascinating, right? And like you read that and like I think every creative person relates to that.
I never got a hold of that book. Is there still a way to get it? I can pull up I want to pull up the Instagram for fucking 40. And this is a comic, right?
This is a comic. I participated in it. Several other artists participated in it. In contributing to it. So I'd like to actually read they put together like a statement, and I think I'm going to read their statement so that way people can know what's going on. So, Fucking 40 says, we're sorry for the updates have slowed down. As supporters and friends, you deserve to know that the reasons are simple. It's complicated. Trust us, we're not trying to be cryptic. There are just aspects of the project that we as organizers admittedly never anticipated. On top of the not-so-inspirational steps of settling Ed's estate before the essentially new business, we're working through both legal and creative challenges regarding Fucking 40's content and publication. The time for frustration and disappointment over all these steps has passed. We, all of us, including you, are dedicating to seeing this through. This coming Monday, at the time it was posted, will mark 1 year since Ed's path abruptly ended. In that year, we have carefully retraced his footsteps and vow to complete his path with an ever-growing sense of purpose and dedication. Please continue to be patient with us, and when asked about Ed and the project, encourage others to do the same. So that's where it's standing at the moment.
Okay. So they're in the process of trying to put it out, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think the simple way to say it is that it's still going to be, it will still see the light of day. It's just there have been some bumps along the way. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Now, he did a lot of different things, right? Because he did comics and he was doing improv and I'm not sure what he was
In fact, I drew 2 of the improv pages in the book. Yeah, he was doing improv. He was doing karaoke really regularly, which he had a whole karaoke crew, which was like a whole separate crew. He came to Drink and Draw pretty regularly back when we had it at this bar. What else was he doing? I mean, yeah, he was pretty active.
Yeah. I only got to meet him twice. I wish that I'd been able to
really?
to spend more time. I mean,
Yeah.
in spite of only meeting him twice, I feel like he impacted my life. You know?
Yeah, sure.
Because, well, one thing was, the first time I met him in Tokyo,
Yeah.
we got to talking about, like, 80s music. And he told me, you got to listen to this radio show called Crap from the Past from Minneapolis. So I don't even know if he told me it was from Minneapolis, but I searched for Crap from the Past, and it's on this community radio station in Minneapolis, and I'm still listening to that. I've listened to other programs on the station. I've visited the station. You know, I've met the people there. So, you know, that had an impact just because, you know, Ed told me about that.
Right.
And also on that trip 5 years ago, and I was, you know, doing a series of podcast episodes about, you know, different interviews and stuff around the country, and Ed dubbed it Tim Across America, and I used that name for the series on the podcast.
Well, and he also did the podcast. He did a podcast
Yeah, he
about
helped
Star
arrange.
Wars.
Oh yeah, he had his own podcast.
Yeah.
That's right.
Voices of the Republic.
Voice of the Republic. Yeah, we used to run his ad on our show.
Yeah.
Brian will be back later in the show to talk about his comics and the state of the industry. Now some memories of Ed from his family and friends.
All right, so we have some other friends of Ed, as I've been calling them, at the table, and please introduce yourselves.
I'm Kristen, Ed's first cousin.
Okay.
And I'm Carol. I'm Ed's aunt.
Okay. So, yeah, we before you got here, we talked a bit about Ed and the comic he was working on and everything. But we could just ask you each, maybe tell us a memory, one of your memories of Ed, maybe your favorite memory of him.
You. When you compose yourself, tell them about how you used to take your bikes to the mall. That's funny.
Yeah. So we weren't supposed to cross Gulf Road with our bikes. Because
This was in Mount Prospect.
Yeah, Mount Prospect. So I think he was, well, I'm going to be 50, so he's be 45.
He would have been 45.
Yeah. So 5-year difference. So, he's, so I go ahead and, he convinced me that. we can cross Gulf Road to go to the comic book store and the mall, and it's okay. So we would do this all the time, because I was over there all the time. You know, and then no one really knew, because we're just riding our bikes around. Yeah. You know, so we would just go to the comic book store and hang out. And I don't think we bought anything, because that would be evidence. You know, that would be evidence. So we used to play Star Wars in the horseshoe pits.
I was just about to ask that. I was imagining that he would have been the guy who was like referring to his bike as a speeder bike.
Yeah, he was really good on the big wheel too. You know, he knew how to skid out for sure. Yeah, he was really good at that. Yeah, Star Wars horseshoe pits. We watched the first Star Wars on VHS. It was bootleg. Uncle Bob brought it in and had the projection screen TV. Like the first, so we would watch Star Wars on that, like over and over and over again. I can pour it. Yeah, thanks.
Can I give another lesson?
Yeah, that'd be great.
And
I'm having a senior moment here. I can't think of anything.
There was one time he swore.
Oh yeah.
What did he say? Fuck you or something like this.
I don't know.
And I got blamed for that. And if you know our family, I don't know. We all swear. So.
They blamed you for everything.
Yeah, they blamed because I was the oldest. You know, because Renee and Bobby were like off. You know, they were older. You know, so it was just me and Ed getting in trouble. Yeah, but that one time when he swore, it was just, it came down. Hell came down on that one.
Did he ever draw stuff for you as kids?
Not really. No. I mean, he had a poster of Iron Maiden on his door of Eddie. Yeah. Because his name was Eddie. Yeah. So he had that. But I don't think he ever listened to Iron Maiden. To tell you the truth, you know.
He just liked them from the visual aspect.
Yeah. Renee's got a lot of his pictures.
Yeah.
From the wake. There was who drew pictures.
I think she's bringing other stuff.
Is she?
Some other rare stuff that he's like suitcase. I don't know if you talked to Renee, but he would have suitcases and books in these suitcases and drawings, and it goes on and on and on. I mean, just like sitting at coffee shops and just flipping over the menu, just drawing. Sure. You know, so it's like, it's pretty crazy, you know. Awesome. Just drawing people's scenarios, just sitting there, and
okay.
That's remember anything else? I can't know because they were always together, and I was always with Eddie's mom.
Thank you very much.
Elaine. So I mean, you know, we got together on holidays, and we just had a really good Polish Christmas, and
Okay, I'm Ed's sister Renee, and when Ed's always drawn, and I used to draw, so he would draw with me, and I always used to tell him that an artist always signs their name or initials and dates it. An artist always does that, somewhere in the bottom. So I came home once after work, and my dad was yelling at him at the front steps, because we had like 4 steps. And there was this big mural drawn on the steps in crayon of Star Wars. And my dad was going, Ed, did you do this? And Ed's like, no. And my dad, seriously, you didn't do this? He's like, no. He says, Ed, you signed your name. Yeah, he couldn't get away from that. So, yeah. That's my favorite Ed story. Okay. He signed his name.
I'm Bob. I'm Ed's brother. And Ed was super excited and jacked up because he was finally getting his comic book, Chrome and Dust, off the ground. He finally finished book number 1, and that was all he would talk about. And my friend Darrell and I, all 3 of us, and my friend David, we would all be playing video games together online. We'd play for an hour, and Ed would just keep talking about Chrome and Dust. He wasn't not focusing on the game. And after a while, it's like, Ed, that's enough. Whatever. Just get your book published and play the game. And he would start talking about Chrome and Dust. And then we'd play for another time, and more Chrome and Dust, Chrome and Dust, Chrome and Dust. And all of us really appreciated Ed's art. But it was like, after about an hour and a half of this, my friend Dave goes, I don't know what you're drawing, Ed, but this like chains and cars and coffee and banana, whatever it is that you're drawing? He goes, I'm just tired of hearing of it. And I go, it's called Chrome and Dust. And there was this silence, and Ed goes, big fan. Yeah. And then we just all laughed about that. So
I'm Garry Vettori, and I know Ed through the figure drawing group Grotesque Burlesque. And Ed started this karaoke group, the Chicago Karaoke Group. And once a month, he would pick a theme, and you'd dress up as that theme, and you'd sing songs only related to that theme. So, very different than your standard karaoke where everybody does their predictable karaoke songs, Yeah. Some of the themes you got to really reach, to find songs that fit in them. And I saw a couple of pictures posted on that. So after the telethon, I was talking to him. I'm like, hey, this karaoke thing you do, I'd really like to be into that. And Ed gave me what I later found out was the speech that everybody got. Okay. And he's like, no, he's like, you got to understand. This is like about costume, and you got to be serious. You got to really come in costume. I mean, you have to. I mean, this is for serious costumers, and he laid down the law about that, And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'd still like to be in. I've done some costumes in my day, and I was kind of yanking them a little, and I'm like, I'll send you some pictures, And I'm actually a costume maniac. I'm just a fanatic from way back. So I sent them, next day I got home and I sent them some pictures of some of my costumes. I can show you a couple of them in a minute. And he was like, dude, you bring it. You gotta come here, man. And from then on he's just like, getting me to come. And it was so great because I found someone with a passion for costumes matching my own, and it was so much fun trying to match, maybe a dare dream to hope to beat one of his costumes. I never did, but at least to match him or at least to impress him, And oh my God, so many funny costumes and shit we did. Some of the themes. One of his themes was awful as fuck, which was everybody would sing the most terrible songs in the history of music, and dress as terribly as possible. I can't remember.
The anti-Christmas one.
What?
We had the Christmas one where he and his girlfriend were like anti-Christmas.
Oh yeah, the anti-Christmas one.
They wear like black Santa Claus hats and they just were like completely miserable the whole night.
Yes. Yeah. I can't remember what Ed wore for awful as fuck, but I came with a pair of those big MC Hammer pants, which I still had from the 80s.
Why am I not surprised?
You shouldn't be. A Hawaiian shirt. And I had this wild, hideous vest from the 80s as well. And then I had this wig that I had used years ago for my Oompa Loompa costume. So it was this, but a lot of the green was kind of faded out of it, but it was still like this green Oompa Loompa wig with a top knot. And just as I was about to step out the door, I looked in the mirror and I'm like, that's not awful enough. It's just not awful enough. And I had this little, this model I built as a child. Company Aurora used to make these models of, they had dinosaurs and Hollywood monsters. Yeah, so, they had Frankenstein, Werewolf Man, all those, And I had the mummy there. So I took the mummy off of his base, and I cut a little hole in the wig, and I put his foot through there, and I taped it on there. So I had the mummy standing on my head. So here I am with my MC Hammer pants, Hawaiian shirt, wild colored vest, green wig, with the mummy sticking out of the top of my head. And I walked into the bar, and Ed just looked at me. Oh my God, he loved it. I was like, yeah, I made Ed happy. This was good. I lived up to Ed, you know. Oh, that was a classic one.
You got Val-edation.
Yeah, exactly. I was Val-edated. Yes, exactly. Oh my God. One time at this Halloween party we go to that filmed by Derek, there's always a competition for best costume and everything, and mine are usually pretty good, but there are some serious costumers there. Some of them are been doing it for C2E2, and that's some serious costume competition there. One year I hit on this idea for it should have occurred to me long ago, because back in college, I tried to make it not just about dressing up clothes, but also who I'm facial features and structures, height, whatever, who I'm suited for. So I do a lot of Johnny Depp characters, One time in college, someone told me, this Scottish woman who was in our class, and one day after class she told me, Garry, when you fall asleep in class, you look just like Brando. I'm like, but only when I fall asleep. And then a couple of years ago, I was just like, Brando. I thought, maybe I could do Brando. I could probably do that,
So rain or shine,
What have I ever done to make you treat me so disrespectfully, And so I put together this Godfather costume. And the best costume I ever came up with, ever. And I thought, I've got him this time. I have absolutely got Ed this time. I am going to have the best costume. There's my Godfather.
Okay.
And I'm like, this is great. One of my friends there didn't even recognize me as me, until the end of the night. Oh my God, Garry, that's you. I'm like, I got it. I definitely got best costume this time. Ed, I got you. And I get there, and Ed has shaved his head, and he's dressed as Imperator from the new Mad Max.
Okay.
And he looks amazing. Oh my God, he's just it's perfect. I'm like, oh, God damn it, Ed beat me again. I had the best costume that I'd ever done. I totally pulled off Brando, and he beat me again. Never did manage to beat him with costumes. But man, try as I might.
Oh. I have a story for you. Okay. This is during Ed's last days, and he knew. He knew long before this. So I was staying downtown. I was doing a jazz camp downtown on the south side, and I was going to stay at his house a couple of days just to help out and stuff like that, because he wasn't getting around anymore. He lost all of his hair. And when I was coming down on that Wednesday, he goes, "Hey Bob, before you go, do you still have the Star Trek uniform?" "Oh yeah, I do." And so he goes, "Make sure you bring it." So I got up extra early, found the Star Trek uniform. When I walked in with it, "Oh, I got that package for you," and I put it on the table, and his girlfriend just fell off her chair laughing, because even though he was that close, he still figured, I need to take a picture since I have no hair. I look like Picard. I should do this. I should do this. So I brought the uniform, and he was going to do it, but we never got a chance to do it.
That's fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Coming up, Brian Crowley on his comics and the state of the industry, and Chicago comics retailers on how the Big Two could better support the direct market. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support. When you watched Batman as a kid, you enjoyed the colorful heroes and villains, the text sound effects on the screen, the thrill of watching a heroic crime fighter escaping from death traps and taking down bad guys. But the show was devised to interest adults too. What did you miss as a kid? Sexual innuendo.
The penguin's too small for me.
Closeted gay characters.
I like that cape, Batman.
Freudian death traps.
Has the giant clam really swallowed Robin?
Police incompetence.
Bruce Wayne is a millionaire playboy. Hardly a secret identity for Batman.
Whether you're a kid or an adult, there's something to like about our favorite Caped Crusader. Tim and Paul dig for the deeper meanings under the Batmania every other Thursday. What's the podcast's name?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
Now, back to my talk with Brian Crowley. He has a Kickstarter going on now for his comic Hamster Rage, and we talked about how comics on Kickstarter are booming.
So how's your comics career going?
So it's interesting that you asked that. So I am launching tomorrow. I'm launching a Kickstarter for my comic Hamster Rage for the first chapter of it. And so this is a big moment for me. I'm doing, so it's interesting that we're doing the podcast today. I did John Suntress's Word Balloon podcast on Friday. I'm trying to do as much of the tour, media tour as possible for the Kickstarter. But it's real interesting. It's been good. I've been talking to a lot of friends who've done Kickstarters, I'm really a part-time comics person. I have a full-time job, and then I do this as my creative outlet and my side project. So it's interesting. I kind of have a different perspective, I think, than other comic creators might. So.
Okay. I'm trying to remember. Did you do some work that was published by Image or somebody?
I've done. I used to work at Devil's Due. I used to do lettering and graphic design. Okay. And then I've also done a couple of I did mini short stories in Image. So I did for Steve Seeley and Mike Marici's Hoax Hunters book. I did a little mini short story. For Ryan Brown's Curse Words, I did like a pinup. So I've done little pop-in touches, but nothing ever major. I love Image, so I would love to do something with Image. But honestly, it's interesting because the more I look at Kickstarter and the more I'm looking at I think Kickstarter, this might be sacrilege, but I think, especially if you're an Image Comics executive, I think Kickstarter might become the new Image. Because Kickstarter now, you look at that and it's like, man, me pumping up a Kickstarter tomorrow, it's me directly to consumer versus any middleman. No Diamond, no Image, no...
Yeah, well, and I saw that this kind of comics on Kickstarter are booming.
Yeah, they're really... Ryan Brown is a great example. He's done his fourth or fifth God Hates Astronauts. It's definitely his fourth or fifth Kickstarter, but I think it might be his fourth just straight up God Hates Astronauts thing. So that's incredible. And he hit a 200% on Kickstarter. Wow. Yeah, so he went twice past his goal, which is incredible. Yeah. For one issue, a one issue comic. That's bananas. So I think that Diamond and Image and a lot of the other publishers have been middlemen for a long time for indie creators, and I think now having almost a direct to market thing is pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen. Now, I'm going to be talking in Chicago with a couple of comic shops, and I'm not. I got the impression from one of them that they didn't agree with this assessment, but we found a few articles online about how like Marvel and DC seem to be sort of edging toward the grave or something, and comic shops are dying and all this. I don't know. What's your impression?
Well, it's an interesting conversation, right? So are Marvel and DC edging towards the grave? No way. For simple reasons, right? They're owned by giant fucking corporations. Both of them are owned by, Disney is the biggest fucking corporation, was one of the biggest corporations on the planet. Every time I see this, there's a lot of articles by garbage websites that are like, oh, Marvel's going out of business. No, they're not. Or Marvel Comics is going to be shut down.
But the thing is that Marvel is supposedly the only part of Disney that's not making money, and as far as the comics, the properties in the movies, sure, but there was the speculation that Disney might license the characters to have comics done by some other company rather than.
I would highly doubt that. That would make, if you look at Disney, if you look at just from a business perspective, you already own everything, right? You already have everything in your own shop, right? Like, why would you do that? One. Two, they've already done that with some of the kids' books through IDW, like doing licensing. Three, they've already done licensing for other like their kids or their like children's books or coloring books or all that. Like that's already a thing, right? Like they already have that established. Sure. So like within the comic market, like the Marvel Comics brand, like still has so much equity. If you look at like the actual sales numbers, like I believe in January, like sales were up as of like for the quarter. I think in ICV, if you look at actual numbers, like I think the market shares have increased. To the point that their tertiary characters are now fucking huge, right? So.
Cloak and Dagger getting its series.
Yeah.
I saw a poster today.
That's crazy, right? Like you go on the L train and you see Cloak and Dagger. Like that is insane, right? Yeah. I thought 10 years ago when I saw Watchmen billboards up everywhere and on the bus at the bus station, I thought that was crazy. I was like, whoa, what world are we in now?
Spider-Man movie. Wow.
Now it's like everything, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think they are. So on the one hand, I don't think that they're hurting because it doesn't look like from any of the data that they're actually hurting. Now the flip side is so then you have that data of like, oh, how are their sales doing? Oh, it looks like overall their sales are doing well, right? But then you flip it and you go, well, but what about how is the comic shops doing, right? That's a different conversation. Like any brick and mortar store, that's hard. Retail is selling just hard. Selling anything that's going to be like getting bodies into your shop and then telling them, hey, buy a physical product. Like every retail shop right now, even your big box stores, right? Like are battling against Amazon. Walmart is in deep shit because Amazon is starting to eat their lunch, right? So I think, and for comic stores, there is really like no one size fits all solution, right?
I don't know if I think this is not even publicly known, but I wish I knew what percentage of the comic sales were in Comixology.
So yeah, they've kept that secret for a long time, and I think that's kind of garbage. Like they should just release those numbers out.
I guess it's been this kind of balancing act with the physical retailers, right? They don't want to, and they could make the digital comics cheaper if they wanted to, but they keep them the same price as the paper comics.
Yeah, which it's real strange for me as both a consumer and both somebody who's a user of the Comixology platform as a creator. Right, because so I will tell you. So two things. One, I'm the dum-dum that buys the full price digital comic on Comixology because and I don't care because I don't buy a whole lot of physical comics anymore. I can't maintain the space of that.
And I live in Tokyo, and I've got no space for storage, and it's expensive to get them over there. So
I buy stuff on my iPad, and it just and I thought my physical pile was bad. My iPad pile was ridiculous. Now in terms of unreads on, I'm like, oh god, and it's actually I need to stop subscribing because I it's just piling and piling. I need to stop that. But I will also say, as somebody who has been on Comixology Submit and put my stuff up, it's not been great. My sales, I'll just be blunt about that. My sales have been in single digits for that, which has not been great. But I don't think that has to do with my comic. I think that has to do more with the fact that if you were not Marvel, DC, and Image, Comixology buries the living shit out of your stuff.
Yeah, people have to search for it. Probably, or else they'll never know it's there.
It is not. It is really not great. It is. I thought Comixology would have been really great for being an independent creator, but they have not. They've not been great for that. I do think what's talking a little bit more about the market, and again, this is perception. This is not. I'm not somebody who is. I'm not, I'm not really associated with Marvel or DC or anything. But I will say one thing that I think is fascinating that I've noticed is there was this buck for all these people that were getting really angry, mainly the alt-right trolley type people that were let's Captain Marvel, let's make that fail, and now it's just hit $1 billion at the box office, and they're Black Panther, let's make that fail, and that made $1 billion at the box office. So these clowns are just wrong, and
within the comics universe, maybe they could do that, but when it gets into the general public, forget about it.
No, and it's been fascinating because I see it at C2E2 every year. I see the audiences are growing and growing, and it's been really awesome to see from 10 years ago when I started doing my comic and started just sitting down and boothing. The ratio of men to women has flipped drastically. There's so many more women. There's so many more minorities coming. It's been pretty awesome.
Yeah, when I was with my parents in Iowa before I came to Chicago, and we actually went to see Captain Marvel.
Oh yeah,
my parents and my brother and I. And even my mom is it's good to see a woman is the superhero beating up people.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and very, very and confident and just doing the thing and not I watched that movie and I'm I had the same feeling as watching Chris Evans as Captain America, right? It's a great, awesome lead who's there, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I really liked her line delivery too. Even as an actress, I thought she was really good.
And she did, and funny too. Had a lot of funny clips.
Brian's Kickstarter is linked from the show notes, or search Kickstarter for Hamster Rage. The next day, I visited 3 comics retailers in Chicago. Here's what they had to say.
Okay, I'm at Challengers Comics in Chicago, and I'm talking to
Dal. That's W. Dal Bush. I'm one of the co-owners of Challengers Comics here in Chicago.
Okay, great. So now I'm talking to you on a Monday, and I know, of course, Wednesday is when all the new comics are supposed to come out. Sure. So I was curious, how much work is that when the new comics come in? What do you have? What's kind of your procedure for getting ready for Wednesday?
Sure, it's a ton of work. Basically, it starts the previous Wednesday when we get the invoice from our distributor, Diamond Comics, to let us know it's coming in the following week. So we'll spend a few days sort of prepping that invoice, making changes for our subscribers, sending out emails to them to let them know it's going to be coming in. Then Tuesday, we'll actually go out and pick up the books. We'll spend almost an entire day checking in that order, breaking down the boxes, breaking down the order, pulling for subscribers, getting everything on the shelves at 7 o'clock when we close so that 11 a.m. Wednesday when we open, it's all ready to go.
Mm-hmm. What percentage of your customers would you say are mainly traditional Marvel and DC readers as opposed to buying other kinds of comics?
Well, I don't think we've really broken it out, but 30 to 50% probably.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's a little lower than I might have expected.
Sure. For one thing, we're not really much in the way of like a vintage comic shop. We don't deal in the current like incentive variants, the up-priced back issues, that kind of thing. So we tend to work more towards a reader market. And for us, that means that we've had pretty good success in non-Marvel DC comic sales. We've been able to push Image series, things from traditional book publishers. We've got a large younger readers section, so we've got a big amount of families and kids that come in.
Okay.
So that allows us to diversify our product mix, so we're not as dependent on just Marvel DC stuff.
I see. So which non-superhero books sell the best?
Sure. Overall, our best-selling comic is Saga from Image, and it has been for the last 6 years, basically. Each year, it's whatever newest volume comes out is our best-selling graphic novel for the year, and then our subscriber count for Saga is still as high as it's our number one book as far as subscribers go.
People aren't dropping off.
No, I mean, unfortunately, there hasn't been a new issue in like 9 months, so that doesn't help.
No.
But the graphic novels still sell outstanding. For currently being a released product, I think our second highest subscribed to book is probably Batman, the Tom King Batman title. That's doing really well. But for non-Marvel DC stuff, we had huge success with Little Bird #1. We sold about 100 copies of that for the first issue.
Who's the publisher of that?
That's Image Comics.
Image, okay.
Yeah, it's a new 5-issue dystopian sci-fi series. We really liked the first issue when we saw a PDF, so we promoted it to our customers, and they've responded really well to it. They've really enjoyed it. Graphic novel-wise, Lucy Knisley had a new graphic novel, Kid Gloves, that sold great. We were able to do an event with her. We're consistently selling out of things like Infidel and On a Sunbeam that are, more graphic novel oriented rather than like Infidel was a single issue, 5-issue series from Image, but the graphic novel has found a whole new audience. And On a Sunbeam was serialized online and then published by First Second, and it's just done great for us.
We've been talking a bit on our podcast about, there were some articles online, particularly a site called Cosmic News, about how, according to this writer anyway, comic shops are gradually closing and Marvel and DC are having trouble and they're losing money and the whole thing could collapse. So does that sound accurate to you or not?
It sounds accurate in that it's something people have been saying for 30 years, longer. You can go back and find stuff in the 1970s where people are saying, like, it's inevitable that Marvel and DC are going to shutter. There's no way this can keep going. It's 2019. So it's clearly working okay. Obviously, as an industry, it can work better. Marvel and DC certainly have legitimate problems, not just on a kind of publishing level, where there's maybe things they could do differently in ways that could respond to the direct market better, but also as part of large companies, they have pressure from above them to hit certain sales goals, to create certain revenue streams, and that sometimes can work at odds with what we in the direct market are looking for from a publisher. So there's definitely more things kind of creating instability in the industry than maybe we've seen in the past decades, but there have been instabilities in this industry almost since its inception, and almost every business in 2019 is kind of dealing with a lot of variables that they may not have seen years past. So yes, that stuff is true. I don't know how alarmist I would want to be on it.
Yeah. Well, so what kind of things could Marvel and DC do to better support the direct market?
Just from our perspective, like I said, we're not a store that deals in like the incentive variants and a lot of those sort of like high value recent comic sort of schemes. So I would love to see Marvel as a company specifically do less of that. More of a sense of a long-term strategy for the company rather than just a quarter-to-quarter, how do we boost our numbers right now, which I've seen. I've been in the comics industry since the 90s, since I was 12 years old, so I've seen ups and downs. And this reminds me a lot of the periods right before the downs as far as how publishers react and how they're kind of manipulating their market. So I'd love to see Marvel do less of that and have a sense of a long-term strategy, something where it feels like they're in this for the long haul rather than just protecting their jobs for the current quarter. DC, they're introducing a lot of initiatives over the last 16 months that I think have potential to pay off. It's just early stages for a lot of it, so we'll have to wait and see on things like Ink and Zoom. those are both strategies that we like to see because we've seen a lot of, again, success with younger readers' books. That's kind of the two main things. It's for DC, it's just a wait and see, and for Marvel, just better long-term strategies.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like digital comics, like Comixology, is biting into your business, or it could be like getting new people in who might then come into a comic shop?
We've definitely seen it as the latter. It seems like it's more of like a modern-day newsstand where people who don't have a comic shop or have not found a comic shop are discovering comics that way, and then for some of them it just strikes that match, and they need to know more about it, and they got to find more stuff, and they need to have an experience that's not just, an algorithm recommending things. They need a human being to say, oh, you like this, you should try this, or oh, this is really good, you've maybe never heard of it. So for a percentage of those Comixology readers, they'll find a comic shop, and they'll be able to kind of continue that journey.
Mm-hmm. Now, at least when the Marvel and DC movies started coming out, there was talk that would then drive more people into comic shops. Have all the Marvel and DC movies and TV shows had much impact on your sales?
Not appreciably. I mean, maybe in kind of a background cumulative way. Certainly the familiarity with Marvel characters and DC characters is greater than it was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that may kind of reduce the stigma for superhero comics for some readers who would maybe want to get into it, but didn't think it was necessarily for them. Once they've seen a few of the movies, they realize, oh, I like these characters, I like these kinds of stories. So they might read more comics. Weirdly, with the sort of promotional aspect of those movies, we see it way more with things that maybe people aren't as familiar with, or maybe are more niche oriented. Like, for example, Umbrella Academy, we have people coming in daily looking for Umbrella Academy graphic novels. We don't necessarily have people coming in daily looking for Avengers graphic novels, or even Captain Marvel when it was coming out, who's not a really well-known character. Mm-hmm. We saw some interest around when the trailers were coming out and kind of the build-up, but then once the movie comes out for a lot of those superhero properties, that's kind of when the interest stops. Mm-hmm. Like, people read the comics leading up to the film to learn more about the characters, but the movie is kind of the period at the end of the sentence.
Mm-hmm. I see.
Yeah.
Walking Dead, I don't know, is that even on anymore?
I think it is. I've honestly never watched an episode of Walking Dead, I don't think. I like the comic a whole lot, but the TV series was never of interest to me. The comic sales are definitely dying down on that. We're seeing minimal to zero rack sales on that. It's pretty much all subscriber-oriented now. And the graphic novels, we sell a few copies of the new volumes when they come out, but people aren't really starting from one and then working their way up anymore. That audience is pretty much tapped out.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said you'd been selling comics since you were 12?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, I mean, like a lot of people who were reading comics as kids in the 80s and 90s, I was going into a comic shop and they needed help, bagging and boarding comics and filing back issues, and I was happy to do it. And then I just ended up kind of working after school and then working on days off, and then eventually in high school just working full days, and then after high school just transitioning into that as a full-time gig.
Okay, I'm at Graham Cracker Comics in the Loop, and this is...
I'm Joshua Kelly, manager of Graham Cracker's Comics in Chicago Loop.
Okay, great. First of all, tell me about kind of your process of what happens when you're getting ready for the new comics on Wednesday.
Well, basically, like today, I have to log in my invoice, make sure that I get all the comic books ready, print out all my pull sheets for my club, so that way I can make sure none of my club members miss an issue. And then Tuesday, we get our product in. That's when we count it all in, see what's damaged and all that stuff. And that's when I pull club for all my people. And then Wednesday, that's when we sell everything. Or at least try to.
Okay. What percentage of your customers would you say are traditional Marvel DC superhero readers?
I would say the good majority when it comes right down to it. Every so often they'll dabble into something that's in the independent, like Dark Horse or Image or whatever, because you can't go wrong with like Walking Dead or Paper Girls, Saga when it decides to come back out again. There's just so many independent titles, but at the same time, Spider-Man, Batman, those are always a good go-to for your average folk.
What non-superhero books sell the best?
Oh, golly. Saga is probably one of our top sellers. Paper Girls is another one that sells really, really well. Witches is a good horror book that people have been digging on, written by Scott Snyder, and he's got quite a following. He's really good at writing horror and dark sort of stories. Yeah, we sell a little bit here and there. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers had a little bit of a surge for a minute. And then there's always the little classics like your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, my personal favorite, Usagi Yojimbo. But they do sell fairly regular. And also Walking Dead is always a good go-to, especially with the TV show still going on. People are still interested.
Apparently, there are a fair number of comic shops going out of business, but my impression from you guys was that you're not doing too bad at all.
We're not hurting. We're opening up new stores. Like in the last 5 years, I know that we've opened up like 2 new stores. So it's like. It depends on how you touch base with your customers, and you make sure you get what they want. You just can't get like Spider-Man for Batman fans, So you have to make sure that you have the product that the folks want. Mm-hmm. And manga has really had a huge surge here lately too. So a lot of like the younger generation, like 25 and under, they've been scooping up left and right on manga.
Any particular titles?
Well, it depends on like what movies or cartoons are like on Hulu or Crunchyroll or whatever. And when they see that, they're like, I want to get that. Like Fairy Tail or even Death Note. One Punch Man is a popular one. Naruto is a good classic one, along with your Pokemon. It's like even the kids that were originally into Pokemon, they're bringing their kids in now to get into Pokemon. So, yeah, manga's doing rather well right now.
What could Marvel and DC be doing to support the direct market better?
Well, it seems like every few years they're like rebooting their whole universe, and Marvel seems to like every year, depending on what movie is coming out, is depending on how they're actually going to do their new comic book. So they restart it over and over and over. Back in my day, I remember starting out with Uncanny X-Men 238, and I was just looking forward to the next month. Now it's like Volume 8, number 2, and it's just it's really hard for new readers to jump on board on some of that stuff. But once that series is done that they started reading, they're pretty much done. So if they just continue on their numbering, they have legacy numbering, but it doesn't necessarily interpret into what is actually going on in the series.
That's interesting, because I think the renumbering is supposed to attract new readers, isn't it?
You would think so.
Like they're afraid they've missed too much if it's number 247.
Right. In their minds, number 1 is what sells. And if they would just call it March of 2019, I think it would be a lot easier. They could have a new number 1 every month at that point, But at the same time, it's really hard, even for me, who's been into comics for like over 3 decades now. It's hard for me to keep track of who's where and what, and so it can be a little tough at times.
How do you feel that digital comics interact with your business? Do they take it away? Do they bring people in?
With digital comics, when it first started, I know that there was a lot of dealers that were kind of sweating it a little bit, but generally speaking, digital, you could look at anything on your computer screen, when it comes to stuff nowadays. It could be articles or news or TV shows or whatever, but having a physical comic book in your hand is completely different than actually looking at it on your tablet or phone or whatever. And it's more of an experience and interactive rather than being in there. I would say that digital actually helps bring people in. It is a good cheap way for them to catch up on certain storylines from like back in the day or whatever, like Fantastic Four, or Avengers, or even like Batman or Shazam. It is just one of those things where people see it, they read a few issues, and then they're like, I need to see what else is out there. So then it'll bring them in. So it really hasn't hurt the industry. It's just another crutch to bring them in.
So how did you get into this business?
Oh man, when I was a kid in the '80s, there I saw the comic book store open up, and I knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I just, it was heaven to me, and it was like a little small mom and pop shop too. It was probably like 40 feet by 40 feet, you know, and just enough for like new racks and some back issues. But he was growing and growing, and I was growing with it. And when I hit 12 years old, he was like, "Do you want to work?" And I've been in this industry ever since for 30
always
years.
with graham crackers?
No, I was born and raised in Jackson, Michigan.
Oh, I see.
And once Nostalgia Inc. opened up there, then I was just enamored with comics at that point. And Transformers is what really got me into it, because I had to run home and watch the cartoon when it came on at like 3:30, and I got out of school at 3. So having a comic book in my hand, I could reread it anytime I want. And so that's and as a kid, you have to wait a month for the next issue to come out, and I'm like, oh my god, it's taking forever. So I would start checking out other things like X-Men or Batman or any of those other ones, and I'm like, wow, these are really awesome. And after a while, I was just hooked. And I've been in it ever since.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Okay, so this comic shop is called
G-mart Comics.
G-mart Comics, and your name is
Celeste.
Celeste.
Yeah.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So, how did you get into working in a comic shop?
Let's see. I started working in comics like 3 years ago. So I left my job at a investment firm and wanted to get into something that I was happy with. So there was an opening at the comic shop where I used to live in St. Louis, and I started working there.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Like when the comics come in every Wednesday, what's your process for getting ready for that every week?
Well, actually, we get ready on Monday.
Okay.
So today is when our comics come in. So we actually have our team in the back working on getting all the comics out of the boxes and putting them in order, things like that. And then on Tuesdays when we actually put them out on the shelf.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, we just can't sell them until Wednesday.
Right.
Yeah.
So what percentage of your customers would you say are the traditional Marvel DC superhero readers?
Honestly, I'd probably say 80%.
80%? Wow,
yeah,
okay.
maybe 75. But yeah, we have a very good chunk of people coming in, mostly for DC and Marvel.
I see. What non-superhero books are selling the best?
So things like Paper Girls, Saga, obviously, The Wicked and the Divine, things like that. So a lot of Image comics.
Okay. Do you have many kids come in here?
We do, especially on weekends, so like Saturdays, because their parents are off work and they're off school, and it's a nice day out usually, so they just like come here and usually buy like our single issue comics over there or some of our graphic novels. But yeah.
Any particular titles they tend to like?
It's not called Helga. It's Hilda.
Okay.
Yes.
I know
Hilda.
those.
Yes. Hilda's pretty popular. A lot of the like superhero comic ones are pretty popular. So like the Golden, I think they're called Golden Books. Yeah, the Golden Books for like really young readers. So Marvel put out like a huge selection of those. Sorry, I'm trying to music out. And then there's also since the new Spider-Man movie came out, a lot of kids are asking for Miles Morales. So that was kind of like skyrocketed.
I see. Online, at least some comic sites have been saying that a lot of comic shops have been closing, and that we might be getting close to sort of the critical mass. I don't. Does that sound right to you? Do you feel like comics are?
I feel like it's kind of going the way of Borders, where like if you don't have an online presence, then you're kind of in trouble. Yeah, it's mostly just like having an online presence is really like the problem, and then also supplementing your store with other things like gaming. So like here we started doing Magic the Gathering, which is what I was hired for. So having gaming here, like D&D, Magic, other types of role-playing games, or like board games, and then obviously like our online store is like makes a lot of money as well. So
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have an online presence yourself. And
yes, we do.
Selling stuff online.
Yep.
Okay, and then you just mail the comics to them? Or?
Yeah, so we either mail them directly to the customer, or they can come in and we can hand them to them. So we have them set aside here. All the poles are right here.
Yep. Okay. So they might just come in and pick them up then.
Yeah, yeah, it depends on where they live, obviously. Because like we have some people, we have some people that live like all the way in Australia, so obviously they can't come in.
Right. Okay. What could Marvel and DC do to better support the direct market?
I think that Marvel would be better not putting out so many spin-off comics and so many like event comics. It seriously feels like every single week there's just like some spin-off or some sort of like event going on, and like it's kind of alienating a lot of customers. I hear a lot of customers come in and complain about that because clearly it's just a move to make money. And it's like it's so obvious that it's like kind of a slap in the face to the customer, because it's like, oh, we don't really care about you as a reader. We don't care about putting out good content. We don't care about putting out like good stories, good characters. We just want your money. So I really want Marvel to stop doing that.
Okay. Do you feel that digital comics affect your business in any way, either positively or negatively?
Personally, not here, no. I think at my old store, definitely, because we, like I said, we don't have an online presence, or we didn't have an online presence at my old store. So, yeah, a lot of people were prevented from getting the comics they wanted, mostly because of the area that we were in, so people didn't really want to come in and like buy the comics because it was kind of like a bad area. But like here, it's in a centralized area, like we're right across the street from the Blue Line, so like I've never really heard anybody come in and say that they're like, oh, I don't want to buy comics in person because they can just come to the store and come get them. Like, we're not out of the way at all. So, yeah. And then, like, as I said, too, we have an online store, too. So it's like, why not just pay the same price that you would pay for a digital comic and then actually get it in your hands? And actually, if you pre-order, it's cheaper. You get 35% off. So, yeah.
Have you noticed any effect from all the comics-related TV shows and movies as far as comic sales?
Definitely for, like, movies. Like I said earlier, there's, like, little kids coming in, getting Miles Morales comics. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I think it's definitely improved sales on certain titles. But sadly, for things like Aquaman, I haven't really seen an increase, like, at all. People still don't care about Aquaman.
Shazam? Yeah. Any effect?
Not really. But it's also because Shazam hasn't really put out a comic very well. I mean, other than the most recent comic that just came out, so Shazam hasn't really been out for a long time. So I think he's just not really on people's minds as, like, say, Spider-Man or like Batman or Superman. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So that was my trip to Chicago. Tell us what you think. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or contact us through social media. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We have a pretty active Facebook group, so please sign up for some interesting comics discussion. Support this show by pledging at patreon.com/deconcomics. In the next episode of our Patreon-exclusive series, Spider-Man 1963, Stephen Bissett of Swamp Thing and Tyrant fame joins me to discuss Amazing Spider-Man issue 8. That's going live tomorrow at patreon.com/deconcomics. Also, please help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. We'd really appreciate it if you gave us a star rating there and a short review. Our theme is from bensound.com. Next week, Critiquing Comics is back. Mulele and I look at some comics, react to the retailer interviews you just heard, and discuss the movies I saw during my trip. One of them was even a Marvel movie. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.